and belonging. I'm excited to have Becca Gelenberg from Upstart joining today. It was interesting because before we started, we were both, she's got wildfires going in California. I've got wildfires going in Colorado. So we were commiserating on that front. And I'm excited for us to talk about D&I and the really, really great work, Becca, that you and your team have been doing at Upstart and that you've been doing really throughout your career. So I never do justice to people introducing themselves. So if you would introduce yourself and then we'll dig in.
Okay, I'm not good at it either. What can I tell you about me? So I am the head of HR at Upstart, which is a startup here in the Bay Area focused on expanding access to credit. So we're a fintech company. I've been with Upstart for about 10 months. And prior to that was at Google and on the HR team there. Prior to Google was at Hewlett Packard and got my career started at GE. And before that, got my MBA at USC. So that's a little bit about my history. And, I think the benefit of having worked at Google and Hewlett Packard is I got a really great education for companies that are truly aspiring to do well on diversity and inclusion. And I don't think anyone has nailed it. So, I can't say that I got...
Nobody has.
Nobody has. But, I've learned from some people who are extremely practiced and who have studied this a lot. So I feel really fortunate to have been able to bring that experience to Upstart. Like I said, I mean, there's so much more to do. There's so much more to learn.
And that's why we have this series, because there's so many people, it's this community of people that are just wanting to keep going on the journey and the next thing and continue learning and staying curious about this. And what I love about your background, right? These big companies with long, deep histories, and now with Upstart. And Becca, I think you'd been at Upstart maybe 2 weeks when you reached out to me about so continuing some of the work that had already started there, which I really, really appreciate. It wasn't, there are a lot of companies right now that are doing sort of hashtag kind of work around this. And what I appreciate and what I'm really impressed by is Upstart's commitment to this being a part of how you do business. And this really long-term, it's not a program, it's not a check the box, it's how you live and breathe there. So tell me a little bit about Upstart's, the leadership team and how they think about DEI, because I think that's always a good place to ground and start.
Agreed. And diversity it's a part of our company origin story. So we have 3 co-founders and they represent diversity of age, race, gender, education. And you see the power of that diversity in the way they make decisions for the company. They each have these very different perspectives and they contribute that. We're a company like many that value debate quite a bit. And what we know is that those diverse perspectives will lead to better decisions. And we've seen that sort of play out in not just when the co-founders make decisions together, but also in the leadership team that they have assembled and in the board of directors that our CEO has brought on, those diverse perspectives are leading to tremendous company success and sort of a tempered and thoughtful growth. Yeah. And so I think no one on the leadership team would argue that the diversity of all of our leadership is foundational to our success. Because we get all those ideas on the table.
Well, and I've been in the room.
Yeah.
I've been in the room digitally. Yeah. And I've seen that with this team, like digging in and beating up an idea and really trying to get to that best thinking around something. And I've said to the team there, the ripple effect that you all can have, right, just by virtue of what you do and the product and service you bring to the market is really extraordinary. So the fact that it starts with your three founders coming from diverse backgrounds, and then really how that has seeped throughout the company. So let's just talk about some of the tangible things that you've done, right? At the leadership management executive level, let's start there.
Yeah. Well, so this is, one of our core values is every second counts. And so trying to get all of our leaders in a room for any period of time, it's got to be a priority, right? Like this is not a team that, doesn't spend time wisely, but they all agreed that coming together to spend, a half a day with you, or maybe even longer than a half a day with you, Mo, we brought the leadership team together for a virtual training on bias and inclusion and the things that they all could do to contribute to a better environment for our employees, which of course we know will have a ripple effect across the entire business and the borrowers we serve. So that was a really important sort of foundational step.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this already. I joined, and diversity and inclusion was on the top of the list from my leadership. Our co-founder, Anna Councilman, said this, she asked me about it in my interviews. It was really important to her to bring someone on who could drive a strategy, and which is how we found you, I knew we needed help. And so that's how we sort of got connected to Moxie Exchange. And so anyway, the first step that you and I sort of decided on was like, let's get the leadership team in a room and do, a working session with them. So that was one of the most important things we did.
Yeah, and the again, knowing that was, and everybody entered that with like open hearts, open mind, and understanding that this is starting blocks. Okay. For something that was already important, but this is starting blocks for this part of what's next. I appreciated that, that it wasn't, I never got the sense that somebody was there unwillingly, or that they were there in a way that was like, yeah, every second counts, and these seconds I'm not spending my time wisely. Instead, it was so, they really engaged their curiosity. And then again, right, like some of the questions, I always jokingly say, it's the only executive team that I've worked with where we were talking about the principles of physics and how they related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, we went there from so many angles. It was great.
Yeah, that's my team. Yeah. So, and exactly, yes, this is it's an incredibly thoughtful group on an incredibly difficult topic. I think one of the things that I've always struggled with is, I've worked with leaders who have wanted to tackle the problem of diversity and inclusion the way we tackle so many other business problems, which is with a project plan and the things that you check off the list and you get done, and you have metrics like 100% of our leaders attended this, and 80% of people took this training, and and that's the way you do it. And I think the acknowledgement up front that tackling this the way we tackle other business imperatives is not going to be, it just hasn't worked. It won't work. It's got to be about, introspection and behavior change. And as you say, I think one of the things that attracted me most to you, Mo, was this idea of everyday inclusion, and this idea that it's a healthy habit. And so to sort of, kind of educate our leadership team that this has to be something that's on your mind daily, and it has to be a check, like a personal check, when you make that decision. That was a really important sort of paradigm shift that I think we started on that day.
Yeah, and we should mention, like, all of this happened in the midst, right? You already had the plans. We were already moving forward, and then George Floyd was murdered. And so we layered on an atmosphere where there was an urgency that I think was really and even in that urgency, the thoughtfulness with which the team engaged, I thought was really great. And then you really thought about, we talked about from the start, the strategy of, okay, that's the start. Now, how do we engage individual contributors, right? Every single person on the team. And I love what y'all did here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a work in progress for sure. But so a couple of things that we did. So we do, we segmented sort of our stakeholder groups. And so we trained managers differently than we trained individual contributors. And so I should say training as one of many things that we need to do. I don't mean to suggest that was the full strategy. Because
right. Yeah.
I wish. But so we did bring managers together for live training with you. And what we did is we spaced that out, the training itself out over 2 sessions, which happened over 2 months. And then in the following months, and we're continuing to do this, we hosted office hours to talk about it and to bring the hard questions. I think one of the most sort of, I don't know, difficult questions that we grappled with. And I don't know if this is an office hour that you attended, Mo, or it was one of our manager roundtables, but we talked about this idea that if I'm phone screening a candidate of a diverse background or of a background that is different than mine, and I have an instinct that this person is not a fit, but I'm afraid that it's my bias, what do I do? And I think that's such a, like part of the training and part of what we are learning is that we have to second guess our guts. But gosh.
Yeah, I'm so many of the questions, and I think that is one of the best practices that y'all have done with these office hours and giving this space to wrestle some of the things that feel, as a gray area as there can be. And to figure out sort of organizationally as leaders, how you want to approach things. What do we think? How are we making sure, right? And how are we questioning and asking what else could be true? What could be the bias? All those things. And then putting process in place, right? But then linking that back, I think that the conversations are so important. And what I have appreciated about those office hours are the vulnerability, and that speaks to the culture, right, that already exists where leaders feel like they really can come and beat this stuff up so that they can be the most inclusive leader possible.
Yeah.
So that as individual contributors have been getting involved, because you also, in the midst of this, launched an employee resource group.
Yeah, we actually, so we've had some great success there. The people ops team at Upstart is pretty new. That I've got basically, 4 out of the 5 of us have only been with Upstart for less than a year. And so we've been standing up a bunch of stuff, as quickly as possible. But one of the best things we've done is we've launched 6 new employee resource groups, and one of them is one we call Uplift. And this is we launched this. It was one of the first things we did, and I want to say it was back in May, maybe. It was after we had started working from home, but pretty shortly after. And Uplift is a ERG for allies. It's for people who want to learn more, who want to, as you say, sort of like take ideas and really understand them and talk about different perspectives, talk about what we can all do as allies to, kind of make our company a more inclusive place. And that's one of the best things that we've done. But then we've also been able to, we launched an African American employee network. We've launched a Latinx ERG. We've launched an ERG called Catalyst that is for the LGBTQI community. And so all of that has only recently really gained momentum. And I think a part of that came from the fact that when one ERG stood up, other people said, "Oh, I'd like to do that too." Yeah. And you and one of the HR business partners on my team, Jess, worked to create a toolkit to say, here's how you create an ERG.
I absolutely loved that. And that was all Jess, right? Coming and saying, who's the executive sponsor? What's the purpose? So it wasn't just like, hey, we want to start this group. There was so much thought into making sure that they were set up from the start for legitimacy and support, and everybody to know why they were coming together, what the group was about. So it's going to be really fun to see, I would say, in a year, how those are thriving.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, each of our leads, our ERG leads, wrote charters.
Yep.
They're so like they're thoughtful, and the one of the things that's so valuable about them is it really helped for the executive sponsors and the entire executive leadership team understand why, like what the people who join these ERGs are looking for, and it's networking opportunities, it's growth, it's development, like it's and so that helps all of us sort of target our energy on the activities that we organize.
Yeah, there was I'll give a shout out to two different everyday inclusion that we've done in the past. One is with Jason Patria, and if I suggest if anybody has an ERG in their organization, go back and watch that, because Jason had so many great ideas, particularly right now in times of COVID, in terms of how ERGs can play such a key role in inclusion. And then just last week, I had a conversation with Texana Reeves, and we were talking about preparing for the election and post-election, because we know from data from 2016 that inclusion took a hit.
Yeah.
So let's be smarter about it this time, and the role that ERGs can play in navigating us through this time that feels really uncertain, and that we can do this in an inclusive way this time. We're smarter this time around. So just wanted to point those two resources out to folks. I would say, Becca, that for sure standing up those ERGs has been such a success story. I would say the other thing that I saw was that I've seen as a thread is certainly, again, the courage and the willing to go there and the vulnerability. Very early on, in the midst of all of this strategy, you invited Trudy Bourgeois and myself to have a conversation on race, a town hall, and almost every single upstarter was there. Like I remember seeing the numbers, and I just kept saying, I think this is like everybody showing up for this conversation. That was real. And the questions that we got, everything from cancel culture to I can't even remember them all right now. So I think the other thing that I've seen is this willingness to lean in to the hard stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was such an impactful hour that we spent with the two of you, and the feedback we got was it was tremendous. People wanted more. They wanted more of Trudy. They just and I think it was to understand. Everyone wants to understand, and I think that's where the power of organizing speaker series like that is so important. And so, yeah, that was wonderful. And I think you're right. And I think it speaks to that culture we have where, we're not afraid to lean into the hard debates. We're not afraid to ask questions and to say, as you said, what else can be true? And I think that culture, I mean, and it's, that as with everything, there are two sides, and there's, like sort of the good and the bad. Sorry, my dog wants to contribute to the conversation.
That's fantastic. It's 2020.
The good news about that sort of heavy debate culture is that we're used to it, and we're ready to challenge each other, and we're ready to grapple with hard things and lean in, as you say. The challenge, of course, is, debating can be intimidating. And it can be exclusionary if you're not thoughtful about it. And I think that's something we're still working on.
I love that, because that has been, we've probably talked about that in 3 different places where we've engaged about, we don't want to stop this sort of brainstorming beat it up culture. And then we talked about how that excludes, right? If I'm somebody that's on the autism spectrum, if I'm an introvert, if culturally, and what I appreciated was y'all saying, how do we keep the spirit of that while also allowing those voices that haven't been heard, right, to bring in some best practices for including them. Mm-hmm. So this willingness to even look at something that seems as benign, but is so important as how a meeting is run, and how you hear all the voices. I would say the other thing that I've seen you all do really well is, and this is so much your fingerprints and your voice on this, Becca. You continue to say there is not a silver bullet. It's going to be a whole series and host of things, and you know, people wanting to measure something really quickly, and you saying, hold, let's figure out what that is. Yeah. So again, I love the long view that I'm seeing you all take.
Yeah, well, and that's it's your analogy, the healthy habits, right? You can't just go on a crash diet and then be, healthy for the rest of your life. Yeah. It's everyday choices that you make. And I think to me, that analogy has resonated most deeply with how we solve this. And again, it's so counter to all of the other projects and all of the other problems I'm tasked with solving, where it is bullets on a slide and it is project plans and it is banging through stuff and measuring and tracking. And then diversity and inclusion is just a completely different type of problem.
Well, and I think there's also, again, we talk about this, right? The diversity and equity happen with leadership and at the systems level. And you all are looking at that, right? You're looking at your hiring practices, your promotion practices, and inclusion and belonging really happening, you and I, day in, day out. And, you're also equipping with people with tools on that end of the spectrum. So the holistic approach too has been really, really good. So what advice do you have for organizations that might just be starting on this journey? Because if I look at what you've done in the 10 months since you've been there, just wow. Right. And being brought in, right, Anna bringing you in because she knew you were going to bring a lot of this, right? So there was already this commitment in the 10 months. Somebody is on those initial starting blocks. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that having engaged leaders, and it was I knew it from the start that was what I was getting. I can't impress enough how important that is, and it's a lot harder if you don't. And so I do think identifying and finding those allies at the leadership level who can help make this a sort of a consistent theme. That's one of the most important sort of first starting blocks that I would suggest. And then I think it is about sort of establishing your talk track to say, this is, it's the healthy habit and metaphor for sure. And it's, it is about saying look, there are things I can build for you. And so, you do want to satisfy that interest in launching programs. And so you can build, ERGs, and you can launch trainings, and you should do those things to begin to sort of show that. But to be really clear that we will not solve this the way we solve the other problems we're tackling is really important. Yeah. The second thing, one of my most sort of deep-seated beliefs as a person building HR programs is that the best tool we have in our toolbox when it comes to building an inclusive and equitable culture is consistency. And that is where and so when I met with the leadership team, when you and I met with the leadership team, and actually this may have been when I was pitching to them that they should spend this time with you. I think this is when it was, I, sort of went through the list of the things that I wanted to do for this, and spending time with you and launching the training that you built, and, building these ERGs, these were all on the list. And the last thing on the list was, I said, you got to have patience with me. Because when you come to me and ask me for exceptions, I'm going to say no. Yep. And, the consistent applications of the policies we build is really important, because otherwise the people who ask for exceptions, and that's, an example pre-COVID would be someone who is asking for a work from home exception. The people who ask are the ones that often have privilege.
Yes.
And that's where you want to be sure that, like, here's another one, when we were talking about bringing people, like allowing people to work from the office, sort of post COVID. And there are some people who need it for any variety of reasons. And I said, I don't want this to simply be someone who thinks to raise their hand and say, hey, would it be okay? I want to make sure everyone knows that this is an option for them.
So
and
I want to pause on this because it's so powerful, Becca. I remember you and I having this conversation. I was like, wow, that is the model of consistency, right? Where it would have been really easy for you to say, well, of course, right? But you were able to draw the thread through of somebody asking to be able to come back to the office and inclusion, right? I mean, that is getting to the brass tacks of what this, we talk about how often it's just these little choices that are made over time that create this really different experience. Such a powerful example, so relevant right now of a time that you said no, because, right? And how many times all of us think about that when somebody's come and they've asked, and you said they already have the, right? They already have the capital to even think to ask.
That's right.
And
they know they won't be penalized for it, right? I mean, it's that whole like double bind thing, where so yeah, that was so important. And it's so hard. It's one of the hardest things I have to do, and I don't always succeed, to be honest, right? When you're sort of standing strong, and the thing that you have to be really thoughtful about is it's that at Google there was a leader who used the term principled deviations from policy. And I loved that term, because it's not that we're inflexible. It's
right.
just, if we are going to grant an exception, is it based on principle, not just based on the fact that somebody asked? And I think that's the key, right? And that's sort of that balance that gets so hard in an HR position, because you don't want to, be so inflexible that you're not allowing the business to move forward, right? Which is always the argument. But you also want to make sure that you are being equitable and giving thought to those who don't feel like they can use their voice. And so you have to be the voice for them.
Oh my gosh, I knew this was going to be a good conversation. I mean, we covered everything from, having a charter for your ERGs to making sure that, the leadership team is engaged, to consistency, to, training, to like any number of things. Do you have any last thoughts for us?
Oh,
give me one last truth bomb.
Oh gosh. No, I have none. All I know is that this is just incredibly hard work. And I don't like, the truth is, I don't know what's going to work. I don't think anybody does yet. To me, the idea of everyday learning, every day, just sort of weaving it into everything you think about and do is the idea that resonates most deeply with me. And I'm optimistic and hopeful.
And I will put it forth for you, the humility with which you have approached this and just continue is such a best practice. Right? We don't know what we don't know. Some things are going to work, some things aren't, but we will be consistent and we will keep moving forward.
That's right. Yeah, it's doing the next right thing.
Do the next right thing. Excellent. Excellent. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining us for Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Becca, you're amazing. It's been such a pleasure to work with you. Keep doing the next right thing. And everybody, we will see you next week.